At 101 years old, President Russell M. Nelson, the man who once held a human heart in his hands as a world-renowned surgeon and later reshaped one of the fastest-growing faiths in the world, has taken his final breath. But what most people don't realize is that Nelson's story is far more than just the death of a religious leader. It's a tale of transformation, controversy, and sweeping changes that altered millions of lives across the globe. And as details of his last days begin to emerge, shocking questions are being raised about his legacy, his leadership, and the future of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Today, we're diving deep into the remarkable and at times controversial life and legacy of President Russell M. Nelson. For more than a century, Nelson wore two very different titles. First, a pioneering heart surgeon whose medical breakthroughs saved countless lives, and later a spiritual leader whose bold decisions reshaped the global landscape of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. But what many don't realize is just how sweeping, dramatic, and even disruptive his presidency truly was. From changing long-held traditions to pushing the church into an entirely new era, Nelson wasn't afraid to challenge norms. And in doing so, he left behind both admiration and criticism. In this video, we'll uncover the lesser-known stories behind Nelson's rise to power, the decisions that defined his leadership, and the ripple effects of his death that could alter the future of the LDS Church forever. You won't believe how much of the church we know today exists because of his leadership in his 90s and the impact his absence now leaves behind. So stay with me, because what you're about to hear will not only shed light on his incredible journey, but also raise questions about what comes next. Russell Marion Nelson was born on September 9, 1924 in Salt Lake City, Utah, during a time when the world was still recovering from World War I and just before the Great Depression would shake America to its core. His childhood wasn't filled with privilege or luxury. Instead, he grew up in a family where faith, resilience, and education were emphasized, and that upbringing planted the seeds of discipline and determination that would shape him for decades to come. From a young age, Nelson showed brilliance in academics. He wasn't just smart, he was driven. By the time most teenagers were still figuring out their path, Nelson was already setting his sights on medicine, a field that demanded not just intelligence, but also incredible patience and steady hands. And soon he would prove that he had both. Nelson enrolled at the University of Utah, where he pursued his dream of becoming a doctor. By his mid-20s, while most of his peers were settling into ordinary careers, Nelson was already breaking barriers in medicine. He earned his MD degree in 1947 and went on to train in surgery at the prestigious University of Minnesota. But this is where things get truly fascinating, because Nelson didn't stop at just becoming a doctor. He was part of a groundbreaking medical team that performed some of the earliest open-heart surgeries in the world. At a time when heart surgery was considered almost impossible, Nelson was there pioneering techniques that would later become standard practice. Imagine the pressure. One slip of the scalpel could mean life or death. Yet Nelson became known for his calmness, precision, and brilliance in the operating room. And here's the detail most people don't know. Nelson's reputation grew so influential that in 1955, he performed the first successful open-heart surgery in Utah. Think about that for a moment. Before Nelson, thousands of patients with heart conditions in the region had little to no hope. After Nelson, entire generations would live because of the doors he helped open in medicine. It wasn't just about surgeries, though. Nelson also trained countless students, wrote medical papers, and traveled internationally to teach others. His work touched lives not only in the United States, but around the globe. By the time he transitioned into full-time church service, he had already left behind a medical legacy that could have defined his entire life. But here's where it gets interesting. Despite this remarkable career, Nelson felt that his life's mission wasn't complete. While many thought he would remain one of the greatest surgeons of his era, Nelson himself believed he had a higher calling. And that higher calling would eventually lead him from the operating table to the pulpit, where he would embark on a second career that would make his first look like only the beginning. Throughout the 1950s and 60s, Nelson was not only performing high-stakes surgeries, but also actively serving in his local church responsibilities. He was known among his colleagues and peers not just for his skill as a surgeon, but for his deep faith and quiet devotion. In a sense, Nelson's medical and spiritual lives were never fully separate. While one healed bodies, the other sought to heal souls. His faith journey took a dramatic turn in 1984 when he was called as a member of the Quorum of the 12 Apostles, one of the highest governing bodies of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. For context, this role is one of enormous weight and influence. Apostles are seen not just as administrators, but as prophets, seers, and revelators, individuals chosen to guide the entire church under what believers view as divine inspiration. This calling shocked many in the medical community. Here was a man at the very peak of a celebrated surgical career, suddenly leaving it all behind to step into a role most could only imagine. But Nelson didn't see it as a sacrifice. He saw it as destiny. In his own words, he described the decision not as giving up medicine, but as answering a higher call. Once he became an apostle, Nelson quickly distinguished himself. Known for his tireless energy, razor-sharp intellect, and unwavering discipline, he traveled the world meeting with church members, leaders, and communities far beyond Utah. His background as a surgeon gave him a global perspective. He wasn't just a religious leader. He was a man who had walked through hospitals in China, operating rooms in Minnesota, and classrooms across Europe. This international experience helped him connect with members of the faith in Africa, Asia, and Latin America, where the church was expanding rapidly. But here's something fascinating. Even as an apostle, Nelson often balanced compassion with firmness. He wasn't afraid to deliver direct counsel, and sometimes that rubbed people the wrong way. Some members admired his boldness, while others quietly felt he was too unyielding. This would become a defining trait of his future presidency, sweeping changes unapologetically implemented with little hesitation. 1. A new identity for the church. One of Nelson's earliest and most controversial moves was his push to abandon the widely used nickname Mormon Church. For generations, the terms Mormon and LDS were synonymous with the faith, used by members and outsiders alike. Even the famous "I'm a Mormon" ad campaign had just been launched a few years earlier. But Nelson declared that God had revealed the true name of the church must be used in full, the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. He instructed leaders, members, and even media outlets to stop using Mormon entirely. This decision was met with mixed reactions. Loyal followers praised the move as a return to the church's original identity. Critics, however, argued that erasing the word Mormon discarded decades of branding, public recognition, and cultural influence. 2. Historic changes to temples. If there's one legacy Nelson will always be remembered for, it's his explosive expansion of temples worldwide. During his presidency, he announced more than 150 new temples, more than any other church president in history. For members, temples are sacred spaces central to their faith, and this expansion was seen as a fulfillment of prophecy. Nelson seemed determined to bring temples to every corner of the earth, from Africa to Asia, from small islands to major cities. But the sheer pace of announcements raised questions. Was the church growing fast enough to sustain so many temples? Could resources and finances keep up? For some, Nelson's vision was inspiring. For others, it felt like an overreach, a bold gamble that future leaders would have to manage. 3. Restructuring church practices. Nelson didn't just focus on outward expansion. He also reshaped how the church functioned on a weekly basis. One of the most dramatic changes was the 2018 shift from 3-hour Sunday services to 2 hours. This move stunned many lifelong members who had attended 3-hour blocks for decades. To younger members, it was a welcome change, a sign that the church was adapting to modern life. To older generations, it felt like a shocking break from tradition. He also overhauled missionary programs, ministering efforts, and church curriculum, pushing for a more home-centered, church-supported model. 4. Addressing controversial issues. Nelson's presidency also confronted some of the most controversial issues facing the church. In 2019, he reversed a deeply unpopular 2015 policy that had restricted children of same-sex couples from being baptized. This earlier policy had caused outrage, division, and even led some members to leave the church. Nelson's reversal was seen as a step toward healing, though he framed it not as a correction, but as ongoing revelation from God. 5. A sense of urgency. Perhaps the most defining feature of Nelson's presidency was his relentless pace. He traveled to dozens of countries, held global broadcasts, and delivered messages with urgency rarely seen in leaders half his age. He even admitted he felt pressed for time, as if he knew his presidency would be limited by age and he had to act quickly.